Hi, my name is Eugene Sutton. I'm Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. And I'm addressing the Diocese of Maryland and friends who may be viewing this from all across the land. I want to call your attention to one of my favorite scripture readings in all of the Bible. It comes from Matthew, the 13th chapter, and it begins at the 54th verse, and it's the story of Jesus who came to his hometown to give a teaching. It begins this way. Jesus came to his hometown and began to teach the people in their synagogue. And so that they were astounded and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these deeds of power? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters here with us? Where then did this man get all this?" And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own country and in their own house." And he did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief. I find that astounding because here in this scripture passage, in no uncertain terms, we find that Jesus, whom we Christians proclaim to be God incarnate, the very essence of God in human likeness, very God of very God, this man failed. In the one place where you think he'd have the most success of all, his hometown, among his family and his friends, he fell on his face. He flopped before his family and friends in his neighborhood, and he could do no deeds of power there. When he began to preach, they said, "Oh, come on, who does he think he is? We know him. That's Mary's son. We grew up with him and with his brothers. Who does he? He's putting on airs, trying to teach to us like that." He failed in the early part of his ministry. I think one of the reasons why that touches me so much is because it reminds me that a lot of life is about failing, failure, falling on one's face, not succeeding, losing. Think about a toddler when a toddler begins to walk and she's taking those first steps and then she falls right on her feet. And she tries again and she falls again. What parent, though, would say, "Annie, why don't you stop that? You're going to hurt yourself. You keep failing time and time again. Stop." No, they would encourage her. And then later on, as a toddler or beginning school perhaps, and a young man, a young boy is trying to learn how to do a bicycle without training wheels. And so the training wheels come off, he goes down, you flop over, you failed, you're scraping your knees, you get up and you try again. But what caregiver, what mother or father would say, "Tommy, stop it. Put back those training wheels on"? No. You encourage him on and on because he won't learn unless he falls down. Most of life really is about losing. It's about failing, not really reaching the goal that you want, at least in the short term. You remember how it was in high school. For so many of us, and maybe all of us sometimes, you don't get the prom date. You don't get asked by the one. In fact, she won't even look at you, or he won't give you the time of day. And for so often, you don't get the scholarship that you are really counting on to get into the school of your choice. You don't get the job. You don't get the raise. You don't get the promotion. You don't get the loan. You don't get the house. It's losing, losing, losing. You lose loved ones. You lose friends. You lose your health. You lose your life. Most of life is about losing. And maybe that's why I like baseball so much. Who are these people here? Do you recognize these two teams? There's the Baltimore Orioles there, and there's the Washington Nationals. Now, they just played each other in a Beltway series. I'll have you know, I'm a happy resident of the city of Baltimore, and my hometown is Washington, D.C. It is really weird for me in the Beltway series because I root for both of these teams. And it doesn't feel right to me that I root and I just cheer every time either of them scored a run. In fact, I missed losing. I didn't get the sense that somebody was losing here that didn't affect me. Well, of course, there are two great teams in baseball. And who are the ball players? The very most successful baseball players are the ones who lose most of the time. In fact, the best hitters lose 70% of the time. They bat 300. Every 1,000 times they get to the plate, they only win 30% of the time. I like baseball like that because it's all about managing loss and managing disappointment. Maybe one of the greatest sports heroes of all time is Michael Jordan. He is sometimes called the greatest basketball player of all time. Here's what Michael Jordan had to say. I missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 25 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life. And then he said, and that's why I succeed. But maybe the best known failure in life was the one we call, arguably, the greatest president in U.S. history, Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president. You look over his life and career, Abraham Lincoln failed much more than he succeeded. In 1832, he lost his job. Now, of course, earlier in his life, you know, he and his family had to move out of their house because of failures. He had to move out, and then his mother died a few years after that. In 1832, he lost the job that he had. Just list them up there. 1832, also later, he was defeated in his run for the Illinois state legislature. 1833, he tried a business, and he failed at that business. 1834, he was elected to the legislature again, 2 years after his defeat. 1835, his sweetheart, his fiancée, they were engaged to be married, Anne Rutledge. She died. Maybe that explains why for the next 6 months, he was in bed and couldn't move. He had a nervous breakdown. In 1838, picking himself up, he ran for a bid to become Speaker for the legislature, lost. 1843, defeated for nomination to the United States House of Representatives. 1846, a success, elected to Congress. 1848, he lost. He had to leave, lost his renomination to the House. In 1849, he tried to become the land officer. He was rejected. He lost that bid. 1854, he ran for the U.S. Senate. He was defeated. 1856, he wanted to be nominated for the United States vice presidency. Didn't get it. He was defeated. 1858, he ran for Senate again. Lost. 1860, elected president of the United States of America. It's all about loss. What do you do when you don't make it? You don't reach the goal. What do you do? How do you move on? The Diocese of Maryland knows something about loss. We've experienced some tremendous losses as a diocese, even in the last few years. And our congregations have known many losses. Do you remember when we began the decade with the Horizons 2015 vision priorities. There it is. We call it the Peace Plan, P-E-A-C-E. And this was a discernment by the whole diocese. Hundreds of people had input into this. Here's what we say our goals are that we wanted to realize by 2015. By 2015, we wanted to grow an average Sunday attendance by 10%. By 2015, we wanted to equip every member of this diocese to be an evangelist, to share the good news. By 2015, we wanted each of our congregations in the action area to be an agent of change in their communities and known as such in the communities surrounding them. The C one is for Christian formation. We said by 2015, we wanted 40% of members of all ages to be involved in a Christian formation program. And then E, education. We wanted to be advocate for the poor and education across the state of Maryland, and with a particular focus on doing something in the city of Baltimore where the highest and densest concentration of poor folks were. How did we do? We reported it. You know the story. We did not grow by average Sunday in attendance of 10%. Our averages decreased. In evangelism, you tell me, is everyone feeling better about being an evangelist and doing that? Our presiding bishop talked a lot about that yesterday and last night. In the action area, yes, we're making progress in each of those areas in some way, but still some of our congregations are not as involved as they want to be in becoming an agent of reconciliation and change in their communities. And in Christian formation, a near success. By one measure, we did have 39% of people of all ages in a Christian formation program in our diocese. Just about made it. Was it, Scott, was it 39.8% or 39.3%? At any rate, we almost made it. And then finally in the education area, to advocate for the poor in education, my, did we knock that one out of the park. We have advocated for the poor in education. That commission that headed that up had resource packets ready for all the congregations to be able to go to their local schools and be agents of change. Also, out of that came the Sutton Scholars Program. I didn't name the program. The people involved had named it, but I advocated for it. That program to help high school students in Baltimore City schools to be not chained to the streets claiming them, and seeing what we can do to stop the school to prison pipeline, making a difference in their lives. When I was a teenager in Washington, D.C., I can tell you that one of the reasons I stand before you now is because adults reached down and said, Eugene, we want to commit to you for some time. And while that program is based in Baltimore, we're trying to get it solidified and it's growing. It's doubled this year from last year. We want it to be replicated. Why just Baltimore? Why not Hagerstown? Why not Frostburg? Why not Southern Maryland? We're trying to perfect the model here and let it go to other places. In fact, we've already been approached by people in other communities outside the state. We're saying, we heard about what you're doing here. How can we repeat it? But our experience as a diocese as a whole was that we didn't make all the goals. We missed the mark. But isn't that what a lot of it's about? And we're certainly not alone among the mainline denominations in terms of attendance and of membership. How are the denominations doing? Here's one study. It's called Whistling Past the Graveyard. And it says, at present trends, and assuming nothing changes, By the year 2211, the United Methodist Church locks its doors. The drop-dead date for the Catholic Church, they say, in America is 2202. For our Lutheran brothers and sisters, 2055. Presbyterian Church USA, 2046. The United Church of Christ, by the year 2041, you know how stats go at present rates and trends. They'd say, it's hard to think that it's a denomination after that. Well, thank God we're not in that list. But in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, there it is, the Episcopal Church, 2064. If present trends, they say, continue. I don't see it that way, because present trends don't continue for people of faith and hope. And the church has been there before. My, have we been there before? What are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? Well, what did Jesus do? Right after that episode where he went to his hometown and he just failed, it wasn't working. Was it the message? Was it the person? Was it the time? Was it the circumstance? The scriptures don't say. But here's what it said he did. Then he went out among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2. That's Mark's version of it. Basically, it meant Jesus moved on. It says in the later scriptures, he shook the dust off his feet. He got himself up. And what did he do? He expanded. He expanded. He didn't stay where he was. He said, we're going to move this into new frontiers. And notice he said we, not I. He went about villages, of course, even outside that area, but he said, I need some help. I can't do this alone. And that's a marvelous thing when we fail, when we realize we need help. And the same kinds of resources that we've always been calling on, maybe we need more. Maybe we need that congregation down the street, and we got to partner with them or across town. And maybe even more congregations are going to say, we're going to do this 2 by 2 rather than 1 at a time. How did that work out for him? Now it's growing. It doesn't always work in one particular place at one time everywhere, but the movement is still growing. The main thing is just like that toddler, just as that boy and girl learning to walk, just as the bicyclist, just as you and I have to do again and again and again. You pick yourself up and you move on. You know, I see that happening in the Diocese of Maryland all the time. Bishop Chilton sees it. All of our staff see it. We see this diocese and these parishes, these congregations, missions, doing amazing things. You're thinking outside of the box. You're saying, what more can we do that we haven't done before? And you're learning from your mistakes, just as Albert Einstein once said, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. If you're making mistakes, it may be because you're doing new things. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Don't worry about the mistakes. Just move it on. What do social scientists and health professionals say are the 2 key ingredients for people to be able to move on from failure and from loss? 2 key things they say. One is optimism. Optimism. My brothers and sisters, I want to tell you, I disagree. I disagree. I don't think optimism goes nearly far enough. You know, a few weeks ago at our Claggett Conference Center, which is more and more becoming a center for groups around the country using it, there was a national gathering called Gathering of Leaders for most of a week. These are clergy in the Episcopal Church, more on the younger side, who spend 3 or 4 days together and talk about how are we going to help rebuild this church of ours, this sturdy church. It's a great movement. And we were the host diocese, and it was a pleasure being in that room and just seeing all of these young clergy. And we had several conversations, both formal and informal. And in one of the informal conversations, I was sitting down with a bunch of 3 or 4 of them. And besides, and I will tell you, there were several clergy in our diocese who are part of that movement. But I asked them this question: are you optimistic about the Episcopal Church? Now, I don't know if it was the way I asked it or what, but I didn't get the answer I wanted. I expected to say, oh, yes, these are the future leaders of the church. They're nominated by others. They're ready to go. I thought, oh, yes, I'm optimistic. No, they were going, well, you know, we got this, and this. And I didn't get the optimistic outlook that I thought that I was going to get. And I began to wonder, what is it about that? Maybe I didn't ask the right question. Sometimes when we don't get the answers that we're looking for, it means that we're not asking the right questions. I began to look at that word optimism. Here's what Merriam-Webster's dictionary says is the definition of optimism. Optimism, say it with me, a feeling or belief that good things will happen in the future. An inclination to put the most favorable construction upon events, to anticipate the best possible outcome. That's optimism. And yet, optimism seems to me from that definition has more to deal with feelings, inclinations, maybe how you feel about something. And that may not even be the most accurate. I want to tell you that I'm an optimistic person to a fault. I really am. If there is a possible sunny inclination about any situation, I'm going right for it. I'm optimistic about people and situations, and I'm optimistic to the point where I actually believe that everything everybody says is actually true. And they're not spinning anything or not wanting anything. And I actually believe that everybody really does have everybody else's best interests at heart. Sometimes I've actually been confronted with, no, you're overly optimistic. And sometimes optimism can get in the way of seeing things as they really are. One of my heroes in baseball is Casey Stengel. He did a number of jobs, but he was also Casey was the manager for the New York Yankees. And this is what he said: the secret to managing is to keep the 5 guys who hate you away from the 5 who are undecided. Now, I don't know if they teach that in management schools or not, but there is one way to think of leadership. Now, obviously, maybe he's overly pessimistic, but on the other hand, he was very successful. I have a friend who is another leader, a lay leader in the Episcopal Church, widely known, and she said that an optimist will never be pleasantly surprised. Think about that. An optimist will never be pleasantly surprised. Well, we need something more than optimism, because optimism isn't always accurate. I went back to the gathering of leaders a couple of days later, and I said, you know, guys, I didn't ask the right question. It wasn't a bad question, but there's a better question. And if we keep questioning keep going deeper into questions, we get into better and better questions. And I said, the better question is this: what do you hope for? Is there hope for the church? And then I got different answers. I want to confess to you that I am not particularly optimistic about the future of the institutional church. Some things are going to go by the wayside, and some things I hold very dear. I cherish them, and I'm going to weep. I weep now. But ask me, Bishop Sutton, do you have hope for the church? Ask me that. That's a good question. Tons of it. Tons of hope. What does the dictionary say about the definition of hope? To want something, read it with me, to want something to happen or to be true and think that it could happen or be true. To desire with expectation of attainment. To expect with confidence. Could happen. I desire, but it's not, now it's gone beyond my desire, your desire. It's now expectation. And to expect with confidence, I've got a lot of hope for the church. Do you believe the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church has hope for the Episcopal Church? Yes. Absolutely. We are a people of hope. And the hope that I have for the Episcopal Church and for this diocese is not based on facts about where we are now. It's based on a vision for where I know we're going. And the reason I have that kind of hope is that I've seen how even in this diocese, how churches have picked themselves up in very dire circumstances. What I said to this group at Claggett was, in this area of the diocese, if you are here in that crucial period between September of 1862 and through July of 1863, you thought the roof was falling down. And actually, it did for several of our churches. In September 1862, the Confederate Army marched up through that central part of Maryland. And it affected our churches very deeply. The Battle of Antietam, right there near Sharpsburg, the bloodiest day in American history of bloodshed from war. 20,000 were cut down in that one day at Antietam. And then the next year in 1863, General Lee's army marched up to Gettysburg through Maryland. Some of the churches that it affected there, St. Thomas's Church in Hancock. St. Thomas's Church was used as a hospital for for the Union soldiers and for many people, hospital right in the nave. And then they moved into the rectory after General Stonewall Jackson's bombardment, his famous or infamous bombardment of Hancock, Maryland. St. Thomas's could barely be used as a church. St. Luke's, Brownsville. St. Luke's was used as a hospital for the Confederate soldiers. I'm forgetting the name of the general who was near at that time, but it was used as a hospital. It was also badly damaged in the Civil War. And in fact, the building for 12 years had no floor, no pews, no roof. It was an empty shell. It was only rebuilt because of a laywoman, Mrs. O'Leary. Mrs. O'Leary, not the clergy, not Chicago. No. Jane O'Leary. Jane, this wasn't your ancestor, was it? Not the bishop, not the Episcopal Church. This laywoman said, we're going to rebuild this thing. It took them 12 years. St. Luke's, Brownsville is still there. Tom Hudson is the priest there. It's a small congregation, and it's mighty. St. Mark's Lappin there. St. Mark's was used as a hospital for both Union and Confederate soldiers. They were all about in that area. They just rebuilt, the rector at the time of the Civil War there was the Reverend Joseph Coit, C-O-I-T. He was also a teacher at St. James College down the road in Hagerstown. St. James College, by the way, was started in 1842 by Bishop Whittingham and it is the oldest Episcopal boarding school built on the Oxford model in the U.S. And it was also very much an anti-slavery school. But St. Mark's was used, it was damaged some, but also they just recently redid the sacristy steps at St. Mark's, and the stonemason found embedded in the top step 2 bullets, a Union bullet and a Confederate bullet put side by side right there. But they can tell you something about resilience in that congregation. St. Paul's Point of Rocks was damaged as well. It was used as a hospital. They got reparations for their building, actually. That's the way I like to put it for them. But it took them several years. Is Tony here? Tony Lake, how many years did it take to get? 30 years. 30 years they waited to get that thing back to where it should be. Did I skip one there? No, they're all there. And there was St. Paul's Sharpsburg. St. Paul's Sharpsburg, by the way, I don't know, we don't have a picture of it, but St. Paul's Sharpsburg was the congregation closest to Antietam, and that was used as a Confederate hospital. It was damaged as well. It's an amazing story how they survived. They also had to rebuild. It took them 12 years. And one of the reasons I think it took them more time than St. Luke's is that it was a clergy person. Most of the leaders we need in the Episcopal Church are lay. The clergy are not going to be able to do it alone. When lay people get behind something, it happens. It happens. The worst thing a clergy person can do is block the change. But a clergy person can't make it happen. Lay leaders make it happen. Ask each of those churches in the year 1863, are you optimistic about the future of this congregation? I think you know the answer. No. But ask Miss O'Leary, ask Reverend Coit at that time, do you have hope? They would say, tons of it. Tons of hope. That's one reason I have my hope. The other is because of another site near that area, the slave grave site at Claggett Conference Center. A lot of us went to that slave site at the Trail of Souls. You can see some of that. We were singing and we were marching there. It's the Trail of Souls. We started in southern Maryland. We went to all sorts of churches in Maryland on the trail of enslaved persons in the Episcopal Church. Almost every time I go to Claggett Conference Center, I make a pilgrimage. I go down that hill, walk through those fields, and I go to the slave grave site. I call it a little cathedral there. It's a cathedral of trees in a little area. And there's a marker there for an enslaved person. Our Diocesan Conference Center was a plantation. Slaves tilled that land. They nor their descendants were ever compensated for it. It was just taken. It was assumed. Assumed. I go there to make pilgrimage, and I say a prayer to my forefathers and mothers there, my ancestors. And I say to them, you would have hoped for this day when one of your descendants could be in charge of this place. Did you dream of it? I get an answer from them. You and many others are fulfilling the hopes and dreams of all of us who've toiled this land. They had hope. Just as my grandparents had hope, my parents had hope. I've told you their story before of the odds that they had to go through to make it in this life. Tons of hope. And that's why I have hope for the Episcopal Church. Sometimes it takes some years for us to get it right, but we keep putting one foot in front of the other. And you keep doing that enough times, and the success comes. So, a quote I like for the Claggett Conference Center is that hope is a garden. The full quote I have in my text. We'll get it to you another time. But hope is a garden, because things keep growing and keep growing. Claggett is the gardens of the Diocese of Maryland, but let it not just be a garden of trees and those fields down there and of grasses. Let it be a garden of hope for us, a gathering place, hope for the future. Well, let me begin to wrap this up. I said there were two ingredients that the social scientists and the health professionals say you need to pick yourself up after you fell down. The second is this: connection with others. Connection with others. I like to see a lot of films, and one of my favorites of a few years ago was Gravity. Gravity. You remember that film starring Sandra Bullock? And there was a handsome actor in that. What was his name? George Clooney. So, why did I remember Sandra Bullock? I don't know. George Clooney and Sandra Bullock were astronauts taking place in the future. And as the movie unfolds, the first third of the movie, slowly everything goes wrong. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. And everything they tried to correct the situation didn't work. Sandra Bullock, she came to a point in that film where she was going to give up. I will tell you, there's a little spoiler alert here. At this point, she was the only one left. And she's thinking, why go on? And she was going to turn off everything and just drift off into space. But then it shows a sequence of her with her young daughter. One of the reasons she was there is because her daughter died when she was very young. And in this dream, her daughter came back to her. And Sandra Bullock had to look in her daughter's eyes and basically say, I'm giving up. And she couldn't do it. The connection was so strong that she says, I'm going to make it. I'm going to do everything. And if I don't make it, it won't be because I gave up. And she kept at it, she kept at it, she kept at it. And I'll let you see the film to see if she made it. Well, that was Sandra Bullock. She made it, possibly. Because she wasn't alone. Even when no one else physically was there, she wasn't alone. It's about connections. That's why I believe so deeply in the mission statement of our diocese. The mission statement is this. Say it with me. The mission of the Diocese of Maryland is to encounter Christ everywhere and to engage in God's mission of reconciliation in the world. That's our mission, to encounter, make connections everywhere. And we say encountering Christ everywhere because we See the face of Christ on every human being. When you're connecting with people, you're connecting with Christ in them. And so, after the encounter, of course, then we want to engage in some way, engaging with them and with others, and putting back together again whatever has been broken. That's what reconciliation means. It means something's broken here. And it has the same connotations for that word reparations. Something is broken. How can we repair it? Reconciliation, something is broken. Let's put it back together. Let's engage in that work. And as we do that more and more, making those connections, engaging, constant. And by encounters, I don't just mean stand by the door of the church, open the doors, and welcome warmly anybody who comes in. What did Jesus do? He got up, he dusted off his feet, and he expanded. He went outside the doors of his hometown, making more connections. It's with the local soccer league. It's knowing the baker down the street. If you're in a rural area, it's going where people in that area are congregating. It's making those connections. It was mentioned yesterday, once again, and we believe in this, but about the ASA, the average Sunday attendance, and we measure that, of course. So if someone comes to you like a bishop on a visitation and say, well, what's your ASA? Here's one thing you can say, Bishop, that's a good question. And the ASA is a good question. And I'll tell you part of the story here. But there's a better question, Bishop. There's a better question. Here might be the better question. How many live encounters with people have you had lately? Tell your bishop about encounters. Count them up. And maybe if you can say, well, none of us had a real significant contact with anybody outside of our congregation in the last month, then maybe you need to go back to revisit the mission. What's the mission? What's the mission? And then the second question, how have you been engaged in reconciliation? So even more, and in many cases, much more than here's our budget, here are the numbers. Tell the stories of encounter and engage. I invite you all to wear these buttons proudly. Yes, they're conversation starters with people you met. Encounter, engage, what does that mean? And you can tell them, this means I'm part of a movement. We're calling it a Jesus movement. And I'm in the Episcopal Church's branch of this movement. And what this says to me, here's what it means for me as an Episcopalian. I'm trying to encounter Christ everywhere, in every sphere of life. And I want to engage in the work of putting this world back together again. That's the mission. On the visitations, do what St. Luke's Carey Street did a month ago when I made a visitation there. And I asked a lot of questions. I asked the same questions about what are you celebrating here and what concerns you, or either what's not going so well or what's the challenge. And appropriately, I get a lot of the same things. People are excited about a lot of things, and I can see why. But the challenges are about buildings and budgets and not enough money and people. St. Luke's Carey Street ministers in one of the poorest parts of Baltimore, Maryland. And here's what the lay leaders told me about what their challenges were. Bishop, we wish we could do more. It's the kids. Their ministry is with the youth in that community. I didn't hear much about the dilapidated building that's about to fall down and the carriage house that they can't use and the grounds around and the broken glass and all of that. Those are all concerns. But they kept talking about the mission. The mission is them. I left there just on cloud 9. They get the mission. They get the mission. And so, my sisters and brothers, this plane is going to land. And if I had here we are. Well, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to land. I have to think. I just want you to know that I am extremely, extremely happy, proud, and privileged to be your bishop and a co-leader with you in this great movement, I have tons of hope for the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. Someone asked me earlier today, Bishop, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years? And I said, we're going to be 5 years closer to goals that we have established in 2020. We're going to fail, we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to get up again and again. As Wendell Berry once said, I don't indulge in optimism or pessimism. I look for reasons to have hope. And there is reason to have hope here. There's reason to have hope in the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. May God bless us all in this work, and may God bless the Episcopal Church. Amen. Thank you.